Given the opportunity, my sense is that most of us in this room would probably choose having joy over not having joy. And when we describe it, my guess is that we would use terms such as gladness or delight, cheer, or elation. We know the difference, and we know the difference that joy can make in our life. I mean, we talk about the difference between enjoying or enduring, someone or something. And some of you are in that analysis right now and wondering which way this is going to go. For the most part, I think it's safe to say that we would regard joy in a positive light, and we favor it. And our focus in this short series of messages is excruciating joy in the life of the one following Jesus. And I wonder if we've ever put those two words together, let alone the ideas that they convey. How gladly do we receive Christ's joy when it's described like that? And I wonder, does this mean the highest quality of joy that's available in our life with Christ can only be had amid something excruciating? And if that's the case, is there perhaps a lesser quality of joy that I might be satisfied with so that I can opt out of the excruciating bit to get the highest quality? I think I can live with less given the cost. I mean, do we have to go down the excruciating path? I mean, really, is it so bad to assume that joy is just simply added to our lives somewhat automatically when we choose to follow Jesus? It's a bit like, well, you get all this and joy as well. Isn't it great? Well, of course it is. Until, of course, it isn't. But we argue it's right up there in the top 3 of the Spirit's fruit. We just read it. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And because it's promised to us as part of the Spirit's fruit in our lives, we can be convinced that it's a given. On the other hand, how apparent is patience in our lives? Or self-control? Or gentleness? If these likewise are a given, why then are we impatient? Or sometimes harsh? Or lacking in areas of self-control? Perhaps these aren't as automatic as we'd hoped for. We want them to be so because we so desperately need them in our lives. We want them to kick in somewhat automatically when necessary, so that we don't have to think about it or we don't have to be held accountable for it. Well, God just didn't kick in at the right moment. But if it's automatic, isn't that also somewhat artificial? Perhaps we have to cultivate this fruit of the Spirit. Perhaps we have to train ourselves to display these aspects of our life in Christ. In fact, when we are intent on displaying them, meaning we have moved beyond just wishful thinking, I wish this could be so in my life, to I want this to be true in my life, therefore I intend to display the character of Christ. When we get to that place, we put effort to train our attitudes and responses to align with what we know to be true of Jesus, so that as we live our lives, we will easily and naturally display His life when it counts. And it's fairly simple, I grant you, to see how this all works when we're talking about patience or gentleness or self-control. We train ourselves in these virtues so that when patience is called for, it is there, or gentleness or self-control and the rest. I mean, we don't know when these moments will pop up in our day, but our discipline in cultivating these virtues prepares us for when they do. But how does this all work when it comes to joy? Do we have to train ourselves to choose joy? And so the quick answer is yes and no. So you're welcome. But before we go any further with this, let's understand together what I think we probably know already, that joy and happiness are not the same. Joyful people are often happy, but joy doesn't depend on happiness. Maybe being happy is a temporary delight, which is certainly pleasant and desirable. I think we'd all likely also choose to be happy rather than unhappy. But we can't always control the elements that lead to being happy. I mean, life happens, and sometimes it is unhappy. And if you're fortunate in life, there will be more happiness than not, but there's no guarantees either way. Happiness is a surface emotion, whereas a joy is something much deeper. It connects, in fact, to the core of your being. And because of this, you can actually find yourself unhappy in the moment, but joyful nonetheless. It's the idea of embracing paradox that Pastor John referenced last week, which is so very helpful because it gives us permission to experience this dynamic tension. Not that we have to expect one to displace the other, but to say rather, how does the other inform this moment or season in my life? What does it mean for them to coexist? And what does this reveal about our capabilities as human beings and Christ followers to be able to manage these simultaneously? To me, that's an important question. And it opens up new vistas of possibilities for the capabilities that God has placed within us that we're typically unaware of because we don't really want to go to that place. I mean, when we're in that situation, we're pretty uncomfortable already as it is. And we're a culture that views discomfort as a sin. I don't know about you, but my wife and I, we enjoy watching PBS, but there's an annoying commercial. But it's not annoying. I mean, it just gets me every time. It's that commercial for Viking cruises. Are you familiar with that? And the tagline, after they show you everything like that, it says, exploring the world in comfort. And the way she says it, it's like, oh yes, I want that. I don't want to explore the world uncomfortably. I want comfort. I don't want to live like these people do. I want to watch them live as they do and return to my comfort, the veranda. We don't want to be uncomfortable. So we're driven to find or create a solution to remedy our conflicted state that causes us discomfort. And so questions like these are themselves somewhat uncomfortable because they don't give an easy way out of the situation that we're in. And so we kind of avoid asking questions like that because we're already uncomfortable. Who needs to multiply discomfort? Let's just move on instead. So we don't take the time to do that kind of work. The trouble, though, is that we're likely to find ourselves facing something excruciating in our lifetime. And we won't get to choose when that happens or how much of it comes our way. But we can choose to be prepared for it. And we do have the capability to hold this conflicted state in tension, the unhappiness but deep joy. And as we do so, we can be surprised by our capability. And we learn something new about the God who calls us into the life that we're given. So how does joy actually work into our lives? A moment ago, I presented a quandary. Do you choose joy? And the answer was yes and no. So let me clarify that. I'm suggesting that in the life of the Christ follower, joy is an indirect benefit. And what I mean by this is to say that we don't acquire joy by seeking it. That's the no part. Joy is something that envelops us. Joy is something that embraces us. Joy is something that surprises us sometimes. When we seek its source, that's the yes. So think of it this way. Perhaps you have known a person who just can't seem to find love. Maybe you are that person. They want it. They look for it. They're out of relationships as quickly as they get into them, all in vain. They're desperate to find love, but just cannot, so they give up. They decide that love is just not in the cards for them, so they let go of the quest. And then what happens? They meet someone accidentally or casually, and because they've given up on love, they're not expecting anything special. They're not looking for magic or fireworks. They just simply enjoy the company. And then something begins to click. And they find more reasons to be in company together, and things keep on clicking until that person finally has to admit to themselves that miracle of miracles, they are in love with a person, not an idea. And it's like that with joy. Seeking it as an end to itself makes it elusive. You've got to find its source. So some time ago, I came across a definition for joy that I found helpful, and it goes like this. Joy is the settled assurance of being in the grip of God's love and care. Joy is the settled assurance of being in the grip of God's love and care. A settled assurance might also be called a conviction. It's a conviction. And we arrive at convictions on the basis of evidence, right? And as you might guess, then, this suggests a bit of a process. So the case for God's love and care is built over time as the evidence for it accumulates, and there comes a tipping point in the process where the conclusion or the conviction becomes inescapable. And when that point is reached, you discover yourself filled with joy. It kind of surprises you. And this joy then, this settled assurance of being in the grip of God's love and care, this joy informs your reality. You have come to a particular place, if you will. You realize that reality is larger than what it appears to be in the moment. That there are times when you are faced with a certain amount of pain or calamity or dysfunction or unhappiness or something excruciating. And in those moments, our vision, our attitude, our focus tends to narrow to that cause. And we see nothing outside of that. But what this joy does, this settled assurance, gives us the larger reality that takes in what's around all of this, who is God, who creates the larger reality in which we live. And we discovered that this moment includes much, much more. Reality, or what we consider to be reality, actually includes much, much more, because it opens to accommodate the presence of God, and then the possibilities become somewhat limitless in that, right? If God is part of the equation, the answer can be beyond our comprehension or even imagination. And we may not... I love that song. When I trust in God, I don't have to understand. I love that. As soon as we sang that, I went, oh, this is going to play well in the message. Don't you love those moments, John? Just comes along, boom. Holy Spirit says, you're welcome. I love that, because when the equation opens up, when the reality is larger, then you see the God in that reality. And so, to be clear, as this moment informs your reality, this isn't kind of an internal giddiness. It's not like your insides are just going crazy and you can't settle down. Instead, it's more like a sense of well-being. It's an assurance that is based on the goodness of God. A long, protracted process is not necessarily required to reach that place of assurance. It might happen that way for some who need a lot of convincing, or are cynical, or have had some unfortunate experiences that have blocked God in their life in some way. But it's something that can come together rather quickly. And so while joy itself isn't an emotion per se, this doesn't mean that it fails to stir our emotions in that place of trust. Of course, we can be glad about it. You know, we didn't need to be stoic in our possession of joy. It is good, and it is okay to feel happy about that. So then here's the effort, or our part, in getting to that place. Well, here's some questions that we need to think about. What is the evidence for God's love and care? I mean, there's some generic stuff that applies to everyone in creation, but there's also a boatload of evidence with just your name on it. Can you name it? Are you able to recall how and where and when God showed up in your experiences? How have you tangibly realized God's love? How has God's care tangibly appeared in your life? What is God's track record in your history? Have you reached the threshold of trust? That's where this all begins to flow. That threshold of trust. You see, the agonizing heartache for God with the children of Israel in the wilderness, the vast majority of whom never reached the threshold of trust, despite overwhelming evidence of God's love and care that warranted it. And Psalm 78 is a perfect description of that heartache on God's part, as the evidence piled up over and over and over. But then the writer goes, but, I want you to hate those. But they did not believe. And the word there means trust. They did not trust. So what does that psalm look like in your life? How does Psalm 78 play out in your experiences? Have you reached that threshold of trust? In a gathering with his disciples, Jesus once said, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. And on the face of it, if we don't know the context here, we might think he said this after delivering the Sermon on the Mount, and everyone's applauding. Or after feeding more than 5,000 folks with a handful of bread and fish, or after calming the stormy sea that threatened their lives. But it wasn't any of those. He said this to them just hours before his arrest, having been betrayed by a friend he had appointed as an apostle. In fact, Jesus said this in the middle of a discussion while disclosing his impending death, along with a brief description of the kind of rejection the apostles themselves would experience as they continued the mission he had trained them to do. Now, from what we know about the apostles at this point in their journey with Jesus, it's probably safe to assume that they weren't thinking, okay, bring it on, we're ready. It's more likely they were thinking, how can Jesus talk about joy at a time like this? It's a fair question. We know that Jesus anticipated what was about to commence. He was aware of the brutality of Roman soldiers. He certainly knew the animosity of the religious establishment against him. He knew what crucifixion entailed. Everyone in that day knew that. What place in all of this could joy occupy? We find out moments later when they enter the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prays to the Father in preparation for what's to come. And this is what he says, if it is your will, he prayed, let this cup pass from me. But not my will, but yours be done. Essentially, this says, I want to live in complete agreement with your purpose for my life on earth, O God, and I trust you for my well-being as that purpose plays out. This is the settled assurance. This is the settled assurance of being in the grip of God's love and care. Nothing that Jesus anticipated in the hours to come was pleasant or desirable. But none of it displaced his joy. He wasn't denying the reality that he faced. Instead, he recognized the larger reality of God's presence. His mind was focused on the goodness of God rather than the brutality of his oppressors. His heart was committed to the purpose of God for his life, which would be fulfilled in his saving death. He was settled in the assurance of God's love and care. He had long ago crossed that threshold of trust in his earthly life. Settled in that assurance, he knew it would carry him through the ordeal he would experience. The author of Hebrews 12 put it this way, as an encouragement to the readers of the epistle. As an example, he says, look to Jesus, the author and pioneer and perfecter of faith, who, for the sake of the joy set before him, endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Did you notice the word order? We sometimes think that the cross was endured and then the joy happened 3 days later. That's not the word order. The joy set before him allowed him to endure the cross. The conviction of being in the grip of God's love and care. That's excruciating joy. Now, the purpose of God for your life and mine is not to provide salvation for sin through a saving death like that of Christ. It is, however, to display Christ's character, to live fully in the manner of life modeled by Jesus, and to continue the mission of Christ. Our lives, you see, are the evidence for the reality of God's kingdom. Through us, God's life and goodness is streaming into creation, bringing life and healing and equity and justice and care. In a word, love. And as we partner with God in those ways, God is witnessing to the world on a minute-by-minute basis in countless lives of the kind of life available to any who desire it. At its core is the unshakable conviction that we are loved by a good God who is worthy of our trust, assuring us that the essence of who we are, the very fabric of our soul, is held in the sure grip of that good God who is committed to our well-being now and always. You see, friends, this is the joy, quietly, persistently, pervasively filling our lives. And as we remain focused on that good God, there is nothing in all of creation that can disturb our joy. Now, this doesn't mean that we won't face challenges or heartache or disappointment You may receive a jarring health diagnosis. You may suddenly be adrift, suffering the loss of a loved one. You may experience the loss of a marriage. You might find yourself estranged from a once close friend. You might well be sleepless over the welfare of your children or grandchildren. You may have come to realize that there are now more days behind you than ahead of you. Any number or types of calamity may come your way. It is our solidarity with the dysfunction of a creation marred by sin. But it is undergoing redemption, and so are you. And none of these calamities defines you as a person. None of them reduces your value as one loved by God. None of it removes you from God's care. And none of it prevents you from displaying the character of Christ, even through tears or pain. As you trust God to see you through, joy sneaks in to carry you along. Thanks be to God. Let's pray.